European countries working to achieve a vision of a zero-waste future. My role at Zero Waste Europe, as I mentioned, is to coordinate our cities and communities program, where we work with over 400 municipalities inside the European Union and outside the European Union to accelerate the transition towards a zero-waste society through a top-down approach, where being based here in Brussels, we obviously advocate for ambitious waste legislation in the EU, but we also support a bottom-up approach where support our members to really implement effective and strong policies at the local level. And part of our role is to convene, to share resources, to help spread knowledge of zero waste within our network and our wider audience, which is part of these excellent webinars as well. And of course, this is really living through unprecedented times, and the COVID-19 pandemic has really uprooted societies across the globe, completely changing our world as we know it in the past couple of months. It's bringing huge challenges to the way that we act and function as a society that we've never really had to overcome before. And yet, despite this, I and Zero Waste Europe, and I hope you all, have been hugely uplifted to see the collective solidarity, compassion, and care that's been shown to one another around the world. And so the content of this webinar today is really going to look at specifically two aspects. We're going to be bringing together waste and health experts to assess the impacts that the virus is having on zero waste policies and strategies in Europe. And it will really examine whether governments can simultaneously prioritize the health and protection of their citizens while also progressing towards their local zero waste agenda. We'll also look at what we can do as citizens, businesses and municipalities to not only protect each other, but also to continue to live a zero waste lifestyle. And through this webinar, we'll hopefully be able to offer advice and support for those working on these issues, utilizing the collective strength and unity of this zero waste movement during this difficult time. So we have three amazing speakers. I'm really excited to hear from them today. And the webinar will work as follows. We have first speaker, Jane Munker, presenting from the Food Packaging Forum. And then we'll specifically, after her presentation, we'll have an opportunity for a Q&A directly with her. And then we'll move on to our second speaker, Paolo Marengo from ACR Plus. And again, after his presentation, there'll be a direct Q&A with Paolo before our third and final presentation from Enzo Favorino from Zero Waste Europe, our scientific committee. And again, simultaneously, we'll have that direct Q&A with Enzo before opening up at the end for a general Q&A of 30 minutes with all three speakers. And we invite you to not only introduce yourself in the chat box, but to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of the Zoom screen here, if you're on Zoom, to submit your questions as the webinar goes on. If you're watching us via YouTube, you can, again, please introduce yourself and your organization via the chat box, which should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And also, if you'd like to submit a question for our speakers, you can do so via the chat box there. Of course, we will do all we can to get as many questions to our speakers as possible, but we are slightly limited in the 90 minutes that we have today. For questions, the final housekeeping thing from me was that the presentations of each of our speakers will be made online in the coming days by the Zero Waste Europe Academy page as well. And we just ask that you be a little patient during these new times, and we're adjusting to new working systems. It may take slightly longer to get these online. So yes, without further ado, that's enough from me, and I will pass over to our first speaker, Jane Munker, who's the Managing Director and Chief Scientific Officer of the charitable Food Packaging Forum Foundation. And Jane holds a doctorate degree in environmental toxicology and an MSc in environmental science from ETH Zurich. Since 2012, Jane has been working as a Managing Director and, as I said, the Chief Scientific Officer of the Food Packaging Forum in Zurich, where she also lives with her family. The Food Packaging Forum is a research and science communication organization focusing on chemicals in all types of food contact materials. Jane is a full scientific member of the Society of Toxicology, the Society for Environmental Chemistry and Toxicology, the American Chemical Society, and the endocrine society. I hope that's all correct, Jane. And we've got all
Perfect.
the societies. So yeah,
It's some tongue
hugely grateful
twisters
to have
there.
you here.
Thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure to be with you. Okay, so I'm conscious of the time. So let's go. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. It's a difficult time right now, and many are feeling afraid and hopeless. But I do want to share some hope today, and also echoing what Jack just said. It's it's not easy to keep positive in these days. So let's try and make this a positive webinar today. So one of my good friends sent me this quote by Sigmund Freud that I want to share with you. She sent it to me when I was complaining a few years ago about how I've been working so hard to raise awareness for hazardous chemicals in food packaging and for taking action to get rid of waste. And she sent this to encourage me. And this is what the quote says. So the voice of reason is soft, but it is persistent and only rests when it is being heard. And you could actually also add, and when it's being acted upon. So this is Wisdom by Sigmund Freud. And in these strange times, the voice of reason seems to be back. People are asking for scientific advice. They're hoping to gain better understanding of what's going on and how to fight this crisis by understanding the scientific evidence. And that gives me hope, actually. I think that's a really good reason to be hopeful. Science matters again. And what I'd like to do today is to discuss scientific understanding that is relevant for food packaging right now in the current situation, but then also giving an outlook to the future. So everyone's talking about COVID-19 now, and we're in the midst of this acute crisis. People are dying, people are getting sick, and almost everyone is scared and, maybe even terrified. So that's our reality right now. But I think that actually, to be honest, and this may sound a bit harsh, the coronavirus is probably of less concern than other looming crises that are waiting down the road. So just think about climate change, think about the destruction of natural habitats, biodiversity loss, plastic pollution. Think about the consequences that the COVID crisis will inevitably have on our economies. I mean, these are all, scary things, not to forget the societal implications, stuff that keeps me awake at night at the moment. So yes, COVID is a serious and acute crisis, and it demands our full attention. But eventually, we're going to understand, and I hope you can see my next slide now. We're going to understand how to fight it, and we'll overcome this crisis. And then we're going to turn and we're going to look ahead, and we have to deal with the knock-off consequences of COVID and the other issues that we're dealing with as humanity. So in this situation, it's tempting to fight symptoms because it gives a person agency, and we all feel good when we're doing something, right? We're washing our hands, we feel good about it. But the more sustainable and frankly, the smarter thing to do is to address the root causes and to understand why our world has been disrupted in this way. And basically what we have to do is we have to understand our socio-economic system, the way that we interact with our planetary's ecosystem and where that went wrong, so that we can in the future rebuild an improved, more resilient and more sustainable system for the future. And this is what this graph here of the adaptive cycle model of complex systems shows. So this is based on current scientific knowledge about ecosystem dynamics, where systems go through 4 phases. Those are growth, conservation, release, and reorganization. And it's reasonable to assume that our socioeconomic system that is very strongly linked to our planetary's ecosystem will follow a similar dynamic. I don't want to speculate right now in what stage or in what phase we are in right now. But importantly, the reorganization phase will come, and it will depend on communication, namely scientific information that is fed into our system and that supports reorganizing the system in a way that makes it more robust for future coronaviruses, because we all know they're going to come, right? And for dealing with other challenges that are facing humanity. And of course, right now, there are forces trying to shift the system back into the same old business as usual model. We also all know about that. For example, the plastic bag industry, who've lost a lot of market share and ground in the last few years, thanks to the excellent work of Zero Waste Europe and many other organizations out there. And right now they're running around and claiming that single-use plastic bags are more hygienic for dealing with coronavirus than reusable bags. And I have to say that that's a claim that is not evidence-based and that feeds on people's anxieties. And I actually consider that an immoral thing to do. Sorry for my assistant appearing here. The reality of the home office. I'm sure you all know about that as well. So what are the facts about the coronavirus? Why has it managed to spread and cause a pandemic? And I think there are two major reasons. I'm not a virologist. There may be many more. But I think that the two main reasons that are known right now are, first of all, people that are asymptomatic can carry the virus and are infectious, are contagious. And that, of course, makes it almost impossible to control if you're not testing, if you don't know who has the virus or doesn't. You don't know it based on the symptoms, the clinical symptoms. And the other point is that the virus may be spreading through surfaces or may even be spreading through produce or packaging that we bring into the house or when we touch handrails or doorknobs. The virus remains infectious for a couple of hours, for a while on those surfaces. And so what I'm showing you here is a study that was recently published by the US National Institutes of Health. Where they applied droplets of virus-laden fluids to different surfaces and then tested the viability of the virus after a certain amount of time had passed. Now, it's important, they did not test if the virus was able to infect people after 24 or 72 hours. So this test is a simplification of the real life situation, and we need to interpret it with caution. As you can see, the virus remains viable for up to 3 days. 72 hours is 3 days on the surface at very low levels. So what does this mean in real life? If you touch a surface that contains the viable virus, and then you touch your face, you lick your fingers, you pick your nose, you rub your eyes, the virus can get into your onto your mucosa, and there it can start hijacking your cells, basically, that will then produce more virus. And then you start becoming contagious and you start spreading the virus. That's how the virus operates. But again, there's no evidence right now for people getting sick through this pathway. On the other hand, what I also have to say, there's no evidence for people not getting sick through this pathway, right? So it's basically expert judgment, expert opinions. Again, I'm not a virologist. Some virologists say after 24 hours, they think it's impossible that people can become infected by touching surfaces. But still, in the current situation where, in my opinion, precaution clearly is justified, it's not unsmart to be extra cautious. So what does that mean? If you belong to a risk group, if you interact with people in a risk group, you should wipe down groceries, for example, when you bring them home from the supermarket, wipe them, just take a sponge with some soap. The soap does the job. You don't need any fancy, expensive sanitizers. Soap is great. Just wipe it down. You can also sequester the products for 24 hours, put them in your cellar or somewhere in a dark, quiet, cold room where they can stay for 24 hours before you touch them again. Importantly, please stay at home. Please wash your hands. And if you have to go outside, please keep 2 meters distance from people, because the virus also lingers in aerosols. So people have become infected just by sort of standing next to someone for 15 seconds. That was a case report from China. So it's really important to keep the 2 meter distance. Okay, so what about food packaging in general? And I know I'm running out of time. I'll try and speed up. So far, we've looked at the virus, how it might be transferred via surfaces. But what I normally study is the chemical composition of food packaging and how those chemicals in food packaging transfer from the packaging into the food. So what do we know about the safety of food packaging in terms of their chemical constituents? Most people assume that packaging, if it's sold on the market, it's safe, right? By definition. And that might be the case, but I would say it depends on how you define safety. And so I define safe packaging as not containing untested chemicals and being free from hazardous chemicals. But if you apply my definition to food packaging that's currently sold on the market, you have to say that a lot of the food packaging is not safe. At the Food Packaging Forum, we've published several analyses of chemicals in food contact materials and articles. So this includes food packaging, but also processing equipment, storage containers, and so on. And we know that many of the chemicals used to make these food contact materials are indeed chemicals of concern because they're known to be hazardous. But what's more, many of the chemicals known to be used are not tested for their hazard properties, and none of them are routinely tested for their hazardous impacts on the immune system. And that, of course, is really important right now in the crisis. So yes, chemicals can adversely impact your immune system. That's bad news. Why does all of this matter? Because chemicals can transfer from food packaging into food. And that's the process that we call migration. And many of those transferring chemicals are indeed untested, not only for their ability to impact the immune system, but just in general, there's no toxicity data on them. Many of them are man-made synthetic chemicals, and nobody knows how they will affect human health. So they may not do anything, but they also may be causing all kinds of adverse effects. So this is what we work on at FPF. And maybe now you're asking yourself, don't we have regulations for food contact materials? Yes, we do, but they do not limit the use of some hazardous chemicals in food packaging because, in my opinion, regulations are based on outdated scientific understanding. So as a result, food packaging that's considered safe in legal terms can indeed contain known hazardous chemicals. So moving forward, my hope is that solutions to safer food packaging will much better protect human health, but they also need to protect the environment. And so we have to merge the human health aspects of food packaging with solutions to waste management and environmental protection. So also production and use, transport, and so on, food packaging. So let's not replace single-use plastics with reusable containers that still contain hazardous chemicals. That's a step backward. Let's also not go back to single-use packaging because we believe it's better for human health. It's not even based on scientific evidence. It's not. So instead, let's work together by embracing the complexity of the system that we're dealing with, by using current scientific knowledge and by integrating this knowledge to develop better solutions that don't become tomorrow's problems. So in closing, let's add a new chapter to this evolution that gives us hope for a better, healthy future. And yeah, hopefully the time for putting scientific knowledge into policy action really has come now. And with that, I will leave you to it because I think I've eaten way into my time. So I think you will get my slides from Zero Waste Europe. I've still got a bit of information on Food Packaging Forum, free resources available on our website if you're interested. And we also have a workshop planned for the 22nd of October. So with that, thank you very much. And I'd be happy to take some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Jane. That's totally fine. I think it's incredibly helpful, useful, and interesting to hear the scientific perspectives and the knowledge on this to set the scene for the discussion today. So yes, please do feel free to share questions in the Q&A box here on Zoom or via the chat box on YouTube. And Jane, I'm going to use my present privilege here to ask a first question about, yes, you mentioned here that we're seeing like the arguments for bringing back single use justified by industry, by those manufacturers that use it. What advice would you give for those campaigners maybe, or even like shop owners, health officials, if you could give clear, concise advice maybe to those who are sort of who want to fight against this. I want to say renaissance, the pushback of single-use plastics here.
So I think, well, that's a difficult one, giving advice. I think sticking with the facts is always a good way to go. And of course, you also have to, yeah, in a way, debunk the alternative facts that people are spreading around. So what's been going around right now in terms of the single-use plastic bags, for example, is that um, they're better because not because of the material or whatever, but because the reusable bags have been shown to um, be breeding grounds for bacteria and viruses and so on. So basically, the concern is people bringing reusable bags into the shop are spreading the virus by doing that, or reusable containers, for example. Now, I think, I mean, that's a fair point. But the facts are there's no evidence to show that. And again, as I said before, the virus can survive or remain viable on surfaces, but there's no evidence for that being a route of infection. Still, if you want to be precautionary, better to disinfect these materials. But if you have single-use or reusable materials, you have no idea whether the virus is on there because you can't see it, right? And so you, regardless of if your material is reusable or single use, you need to disinfect. And the best way to disinfect, you have different options. You can heat. So I would say about 60 degrees will do the job because the proteins denature, and without the sort of protective cover, the virus RNA is not viable. The RNA degrades really quickly. So you can use heat, you can use soap. The soap does the same job. It destroys the virus. Ethanol, alcohol is good. You don't need any fancy super toxic disinfectants that may be endocrine disruptors, antimicrobial, and so on. That's all not necessary. But again, also if you have reusable containers, you should be cleaning them, disinfecting them. And people could do that in the shop. I don't see a reason why you can't wash down a stainless steel coffee mug or a bottle, before you fill it in a shop. When you have textiles, of course, that's a bit more difficult. You can't just wash them there. You could heat them, or using UV light. That's also a way to disinfect. That's not something that can happen right now, but maybe some way to innovate, build some kind of disinfection apparatus that you have at the entrance to a zero waste shop, and then you put your containers in there as you go in the shop and they get disinfected. And that could be one way to do it. I don't know, just an idea. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does indeed.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Sorry for putting you on the spot with a tough one there.
No
Just
worries.
final quick question. Following on from that, there was a question from Nigel about whether there's any negative impacts from increasing our, I guess, access and usage of disinfectants on food contacts or skin or stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. That's an excellent question. I'm really worried about that. I was looking at a list of recommended disinfectants from the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and many of the chemicals that are probably very effective at being biocidal are actually also endocrine disruptors. So I'm thinking about quaternary ammonium compounds. I'm thinking about chemicals like triclosan, for example. These are synthetic biocides, but they have the side effect of being endocrine disruptors, and that means they can actually could impair your immune system health, for example, because the immune system crosstalks with the endocrine system. They can impair your fertility. They can have all kinds of different effects. So I'm concerned about the use of those kind of biocides. For coronavirus, you really don't need to use harsh chemicals like that. As I said before, soap does the job. Warm soapy water does the job. It gets rid of the virus. And the virus, again, it's not it's not a living thing in itself. It only lives because it hijacks your mucus cells. And if someone coughs it out or sneezes it out or spits it out or whatever, and it's on a surface, it can't survive for a long time. So you wipe down the surfaces, you wash your hands, or you sequester products for a day, or if you're really concerned, for 3 days, and then you get rid of the virus that way. You don't need to shoot with cannons against sparrows.
Thanks, Jane. That's really helpful, really useful. So yeah, just for the sake of time, going to move on to the second speaker, but we'll come back and answer the other questions hopefully later, Jane. And yeah, huge thank you for your presentation, and a big hello to your little assistant as well there. And big congrats for using Zoom's new virtual background as well, so wonderfully. Right, so yes, moving on to our second speaker, we're really lucky to have Paolo Orengo, the program manager and senior expert at ACR+, the Association of Cities and Regions for Sustainable Resource Management. Paolo specializes in waste management and the circular economy. He's currently involved in several projects on a wide range of topics, ranging from industrial symbiosis and circular solutions in construction value chain, pay-as-you-throw, know-as-you-throw schemes, to climate mitigation plans in Europe and Asia. And Paolo also has a great deal of experience in previous roles of managing waste and climate projects, specifically addressed to public authorities around the world, ranging from France and to Tunisia. He also drafts technical reports to support ACR Plus members and carries out various studies for the European institutions. Finally, Paolo holds both a bachelor's and a master's degree in environmental engineering from the Polytechnic University of Turin. So yes, Paolo, very lucky and grateful you could join us today, and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, for this very comprehensive introduction, and thank you for the organization of this webinar. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about something about municipal waste management and COVID-19. Here is the agenda of my presentation. So I'm going to talk about the collection of practices, decision-making processes, recycling and composting routes, and challenges ahead this crisis. So does this picture look familiar to you? This is a primitive trash collection system when waste collection started as a way to protect the health of citizens. Decoupling development and growth from waste generation through new models based on waste prevention and shifting from linear to circular approach is the recent story and challenge ahead. But the COVID-19 outbreak has put health again in the focus of waste management. The World Health Organization has recently issued guidance addressing water sanitation, hygiene, and waste management for the COVID virus. So the coronavirus pandemic has a global dimension, but it also has a strong local dimension, even stronger when it comes to waste management. Indeed, in most of the European countries, municipal waste management is under the responsibility of local authorities, especially when it comes to the collection and some of the stages right after the collection. The local authorities have also the key role of informing and communicating to the citizens. So how quickly and effectively the centralized authorities have been adapting to the emergency makes much of a difference. Just a brief introduction of ACR+. ACR+ is a network of local and regional authorities whose mission is to support the members in accelerating the transition to a circular economy on their territories. So basically, we publish studies, take part in projects, facilitate the exchange of experience between our members. And as local and regional authorities in charge of waste management, our members have been greatly impacted by the COVID-19 and must give an appropriate and effective answer to it. So quite naturally, they turned to us, and around 3 weeks ago, some of them asked us information about waste management in the current situation. So we started exchanging with members, contacting project partners around Europe, sharing information with our contacts from other organizations. And this is how our initiative started. The result is the webpage that you can find on our website. The collection of information has followed the evolution of the pandemic and the governmental decisions in the countries. And this dynamic process has been posing many challenges to have an accurate snapshot of the situation. However, after a couple of weeks, we decided to prepare an infographic to frame a bit the trends we have observed. It's important to point out that the purpose of the scheme is not to provide guidelines, rather than to schematize the main trends of instructions delivered by the national and local authorities, citizens, and waste operators. As you can see, we broke down municipal waste management in blocks, and for each of them, we pointed out the main trend followed by the majority of the case observed. In terms of general adaptations, let's say we have observed significant impacts to the civic amenity sites and their use centers. Several local authorities decided to reduce or in many cases also interrupt the services to avoid gathering of people and other measures concerning lockdown. Specific on-demand services such as bulk and garden waste collection have been interrupted to prioritize other services such as residual and bio-waste collection. Street cleaning operations have been also in the focus. In several cases, we have noticed the release of specific instructions and procedure to guarantee the cleaning of street containers, also taking into account the bins for littering that in many cases are used by citizens to throw, for instance, away small personal waste such as handkerchiefs and so on, now posing some issues. In most of country, waste management has been declared as public essential service, and so guaranteeing safety and health for the thousands of workers operating in the sector is a very first priority. In some countries, public healthcare institutions have released the general guidelines to properly drive the local adaptations. However, municipal waste management is characterized by significant granularity, posing many challenges to transpose at local level general instructions. Concerning household waste management, the main trends observed rely on addressing specific instructions to the households with infected or in self-mandatory quarantine people. The instructions are about to stop taking out source separate waste, asking the households to get rid only of the residual waste in 2 or more tear-proof and tightly closed bags. Some countries have ruled a minimum home storage time before making available the waste to the collection operator. This time varies across the countries, from 1 day, for instance, in France, to few days, that is the case of UK or Estonia. In some local authorities, a specific service to households with COVID-19 has been set up in order to keep separated the waste streams. That is the case, for instance, of the Tuscany region in Italy. This choice implies many challenges in terms of logistic and data management. So, for instance, cross data between sanitary units, local authorities, and waste operators. For the other citizens, the trends are about trying to keep on operating the source separation, taking into account potential reduction in terms of collection frequency, prioritizing residual waste and bio-waste collection. In case of temporary interruption of separate collection, citizens are asked to cooperate, trying to keep as much as possible at home dry recyclable fractions, such as glass, paper, cardboard. Of course, local conditions play much of a role. Rural areas are more resilient in adapting to this fluctuation due to space to store waste at home, for instance. When it comes to waste treatment, automated operations have to be preferred to minimize the direct contact with waste of the operators. Logistic operations, such as transfer and storage of waste, are also impacted. Some regions have set derogation to permitted capacity storages in order to guarantee a bit more flexibility in the logistic of the supply chains. Then it's necessary to deal with the issues such as sanitary conditions, fire risk, etc. So in terms of decision-making processes, we observed a wide range of adaptation, either resorting into top-down or bottom-up approaches. In some countries, the preparation of contingency plans started with guidelines issued at the national level by healthcare institutions, translated and adapted then to local implementation plans. Then, as long as the outbreak has developed and the lockdown policies have become popular across the countries, decrees to state waste management as essential public services have been put in place, posing questions at the local level about how to deal with the risk of spreading the coronavirus with waste. The three gears of national authorities, decentralized authorities, and the local communities have to roll out in the same direction to guarantee that actually implementation follows the policy. So the info we have received from the field have been showing variable shortages and bottlenecks along the recycling and composting routes. This is posing issues regarding the cost coverage, capacity of safe disposal of infectious waste from hospitals and healthcare centers. It's also very much part of the game. To reply to these challenges, some local authorities have been issuing specific communication to the citizen, supporting prevention as a way forward to increase the resilience of the local systems. Resiliency of municipal waste management is required not only to guarantee safety to workers, but also to adapt to waste fluctuation, both in terms of quality and quantity. This is due to a lockdown posing issues regarding change in the habits of people, for instance, interruption of commuting or the daily meals at home, but also in terms of purchasing choices, either for shortages in some supply chains and hygiene perception. So here you can see some examples of communication activities to the citizens to face the emergency that we received. And finally, we will have a lot of lessons to learn from this experience. Since we are working closely with local authorities, in particular with the department responsible for the municipal waste management, getting some figures afterwards could be useful to see how well the systems worked or not, and how to improve their resilience. There will be probably strong interest in documenting how municipal waste systems were impacted, and future waste plans might be requested to include provisions and strategies for pandemics. So that's it for me, and thank you very much for the attention. I will be happy to discuss with you if there are any questions or comments. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paolo. Really interesting to hear that overview, and fantastic work that you and the team at ACR Plus are doing on this. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. One question, so again, I would remind all participants to submit questions in the Q&A chat, the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. There's a question here, Paolo, I wonder from Katja here, about whether you've noticed any trends or developments regarding the quantities of the different streams of waste, whether you've seen an increase in bio-waste or packaging waste or residual waste, or whether it's too early to say.
Yeah, this is a very good question. Actually, we received some information in some territories where they can monitor the flows, the streams of waste in this period. And actually there are some shortages, since there are some shortages in services. So for instance, in many places we can see that the frequency of collection for packaging or also bio-waste somewhere, it's a driver to have some reduction in the production and in generation of source separate streams. So it's true that there are two phenomena. I'd say one is the change of our habits due to lockdown, and so how people are living now, and so they are generating the waste in a different way. But also the collection services are changing. So the streams that originate out of the collection systems are quite changing and varying. So yeah, it's and then I think that afterwards, looking at the figures of this period, will be very interesting to come up with some interesting also development for future plans.
Great, thanks, Paolo. Yes, we have time for one more question, and we have a question here from Lawrence about what can we do if municipality hasn't taken any measures so far? There's been no change to the collection. Can we trust this is the right process? Of course, can we give recommendations, or is it very much a sort of differs in by a local context or a national context. I guess, yeah, from your perspective, what are the advice for citizens when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think that it's very difficult at this time for us to give specific guidelines about how to deal with waste, because I think that since it's a very big issue from the health point of view, we should be careful to say anything. But it's true that we should keep going on some of the practices that we are doing. So for instance, source separation could be a right way if we have some support from the health system point of view, let's say, to make sure that the workers in the collection system can do the job in a healthy way. Because I think that now what we have been seeing is that there's a lack of information, clear and accurate information to the workers that are doing the job. We are declaring municipal waste collection as an essential public service, but we have to make sure that there's all the measures to keep safe and healthy the job. We have no evidences, clear evidence about any specific risk, but it's true that we have to be conservative at the moment and try to engage stakeholders also from the health system, so to have some medical recommendation, and then be fast and effective to transfer information to the waste operators to be effective, and as well to inform accordingly the citizens about the solutions.
Excellent. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paolo. I think, yeah, for the sake of time, we'll move on now to our third speaker. But yes, thank you again for the presentation, Paolo. Thank you, and for answering those questions. So, yes, now we've spoken about the science behind this and in support of reusable solutions. We've spoken about what governments are doing to help manage waste accordingly in these current times. And now we're going to bring these both together. And our third and final speaker is Enzo Favorino. He's a scientific advisor at Zero Waste Europe. Enzo is a technical expert and a researcher as well at the Scuola Agraria del Parco dei Monti in Italy. And I always pronounce that wrong. It goes against my British ways, but apologies, Enzo, for that. But Enzo has decades of experience in separate waste collection, recycling, composting, and prevention. Enzo is an expert in EU waste legislation and is highly knowledgeable in the field of European policymaking as well. He's one of the founders of the European Compost Network and obviously the coordinator here of the Scientific Committee Zero Waste Europe, but also the Zero Waste Research Centre, the pioneering research centre in Italy as well. So yes, Enzo, lovely to have you as always, and I hand over the virtual floor to you.
Thank you so much, Jack. It's terrific to see such staggering numbers of people connected. Yeah, it's just about time to discuss COVID-19 and waste management indeed, and we are taking part in so many webinars and conference calls in order to tackle and discuss the various angles related to waste management and COVID-19. Anyway, you are here shown an outline of my presentation. First of all, I will address what is the scientific background. I particularly appreciated what Jane said about we have to keep science-based. And I understand that the emotional angle tends to be very, very important, very, very strong. The word that doesn't show benign to us right now. But we have to keep as science-based as possible. So we will try to establish a common platform of solid concepts to build on what might be the system, the transitional system, and the final system for waste management during and after the COVID-19 crisis. Then what is adaptation and safety? I have seen already quite a few questions in the chat box regarding what is the adaptation at recycling sites, at MRFs, material recycling facilities, and at composting sites. I will address them albeit briefly because we don't have so much time. And then a midterm vision, a critical assessment of the measures which are currently being discussed and adopted by the European Commission and various member states. Most of them, they are agreeable, but we have to consider the timeline. And so how long will such measures stand? Because unfortunately, I fear that many of us may lose the sense of the timeline. But I will go back to this at the end of my presentation. Okay, to start building the common scientific background. This was already mentioned by Jane in her presentation. And this is one of the most mentioned sources, references, scientific references to the stability of COVID-19, which is here with worded SARS-CoV-2. In comparison also with its minor brother, SARS-CoV-1, which popped up, the outbreak was in the early 2000s, but did not come to Europe. It was down there in Asia. Already Jane highlighted what's the key point. So it's the length of survival on different surfaces. And we can see that on cardboard, the viability, the virus titer, which may lead to an infectious load, may be as long as 24 hours, on steel, 24 hours as well, and on plastics, 72 hours or 3 days. So this has to be considered when discussing handling materials. For instance, if at a MRF, at a recycling platform, we have got some hand sorting lines, not all the recycling platforms have hand sorting lines, but that being the case, we have to consider quarantining the waste we have to handle for some time, and 3 days may be enough. But then let's consider another area, which is for biological materials, for bio-waste, composting. And here is the scientific evidence of how weak is the survival of COVID-19. Well, actually, this is related to his sibling, SARS-CoV-1. But anyway, we know that viruses, they are very, very weak to thermophilic conditions. So we know that during industrial composting or any type of biological treatment, there are such conditions. And so in a time span of a few hours or fractions of hours, they will basically lose their infectious capability. You have to consider that during composting, depending on different regulatory frameworks, different countries ask for 3 days, 55 degrees, or 1 week, 60 degrees. And so the safety conditions are well met. Also, you have to consider that biological treatment sites have long been accustomed to managing biohazards, because it's not only related to the viruses, but also to bacteria and fungi, which may be found in the municipal solid waste or sludge, which is another feedstock for composting. And therefore, we may say that the conditions for safety may be met in composting sites. So we may go to a first round of conclusions. Composting is a safe route. So there is no point in considering phasing out composting activities because of the COVID-19. Processes ordinarily required to ensure sanitization by means of pasteurization, which is the thermal effect of sanitization I was highlighting a while ago, but also non-thermal effects such as competition and antibiosis, because composting is a very lively environment. And so viruses may basically get weaker and weaker for competition and antibiosis by other biota, which may be found in the composting, in the materials undergoing composting. Compost sites, as we already remarked, are traditionally accustomed to considering and tackling biohazards. And therefore, the composting operators, they are provided with PPEs. They know how to deal with the input feedstocks and the end products with different machinery and something like that. But also composting has long been used to deal with virus-affected animal carcasses after viral outbreaks. And so we may consider it as a particularly safe way of dealing with virus-affected materials. When it comes to packaging waste, it is safe to be handled after the temporary storage, which we were mentioning a while ago. Of course, the question may be, what may be a safe storage time? Because some are discussing 9 days, but we have seen from scientific evidence that 3 days may be enough. By the way, the fact that plastics are the material which keeps the virus as viable for the longest time may be worth discussing in the Q&A session afterwards when discussing single-use plastics or reusable materials. However, we will go back to that during the discussion. But also you may consider biological stabilization of mixed garbage, even if you don't have separate collection in place. It may be considered as a way to sanitize your waste before landfilling. Because during biological stabilization, which is nothing more, nothing less than dirty composting, you have got sanitization thanks to thermophilic temperatures. So let me praise very, very quickly the efforts which were provided by SCR Plus, because this is an incredible, a terrific inventory of information about what's going on in various countries across Europe during the COVID-19 crisis. But let me make the point, and I know that Paolo agrees with that. Let us highlight that these are the transitional solutions for adaptation during the COVID-19 crisis. So let's put everything in a time-bound perspective. Okay, just to understand, we are now in a situation where we are facing the lockdown, we are staying at home in order to help our national health system cope with the COVID-19 crisis. This is a very informing chart which was issued by the Imperial College in the United Kingdom, and it was intended to facilitate decision-making by the British government. And the British government, in first instance, adopted a mitigation measure, so with no lockdown, but then they went for a more aggressive suppression measure. Just basically as any country around Europe, and I would say all over the world. The last one in Europe was Sweden. Yesterday, they made a U-turn saying, okay, they will consider more aggressive measures in order to tackle the health crisis, which is causing an outbreak over there. But if you take a look at the shape of the contagion, what we want to do is to avoid the peak, the huge peak of affected people, which would make the national health system collapse. So we are doing everything in order to flatten the peak and to push it forward in time. What we are trying to do is to buy us time in order to be more prepared in a few weeks' time or in a few months' time with more masks, more intensive care beds, better testing and tracing technology, and so on and so forth, so as to be able to tackle the contagion. However, this is still the adaptation to the transition situation. But let's consider a little bit in a longer perspective, the timeline. So here we are in spring 2020. We are arm wrestling with the virus. Considering waste management, the long-term perspective in Europe is to get to 65% net material recovery or preparation for reuse and recycling, as it is worded in the European Circular Economy Package. And this will be for 2035. We have got closer deadlines, such as 2024, an obligation for separate collection of food scraps. Some countries have already covered 100% of the population or so. Other countries have already gone a long way. Others, they will have to implement. And for the last ones I mentioned, a question may arise as to whether or not this will be the case now with the COVID-19. Well, actually, we are considering right now a world which seems dark to us, not so benign. We are confined at homes. We are trying to adapt to restrictions and so on and so forth, but it will not be like this forever and ever. And basically, the borderline will be the vaccine. There is a world before the vaccine, and there will be a world after the vaccine. And when will the vaccine be out there? Of course, it's a matter of speculations, but most of the scientists relating back to the history of vaccines for other viruses, they say sometime, in early 2021. So not a long time to go. So the transitional situation is very, very transitional. And if we have to consider the long-term vision, it will be pretty much unchanged. So we cannot consider the transitional adaptation adopting structural changes in our waste management. For instance, some are reconsidering the plastic taxes. Italy has got a plastic tax, which was already stipulated in the National Budgetary Act. And of course, they are saying, hey, but plastic is vital in order to save the world and now to protect from the COVID-19. But even if this may be discussed, and I don't totally agree with that, but even if, can we adopt a structural change just to have a transitional adaptation to the current crisis? Probably not. Same with incineration. There were quite a few questions in the chat box. Will we have to invest more money in incineration? Well, building an incinerator is not a matter of months. It takes years. But once we have got the incinerator up and running, the COVID-19 crisis is gone. We don't have to tackle the problem with the COVID-19 anymore because we have got the vaccine. So we have to keep this in mind. With that being said, let me go to the conclusions. There is an initiative at European level. It is called a non-paper for the moment because it's on draft, but it is a paper which is being refined by the European Commission with some contributions by different stakeholders, including Zero Waste Europe, European Environmental Bureau, and other stakeholders, in order to monitor the situation across the various member states and to provide guidance for waste management during the COVID-19 crisis. But this is for adaptation during the transitional situation, and let me highlight this once again. Anyway, it keeps separate collection as a fundamental service, both for ordinary households and also in general for COVID-19 positive people, although it makes room for possible derogations to be adopted by member states, but it's up to member states. Anyway, as we have seen, there is no reason whatsoever to considering diverting waste from COVID-19 positive people from MRFs or composting sites. Certainly, particular precautions will have to be considered for the waste collectors, but that's a totally different subject. And of course, the waste collectors already have to consider particular precautions because there is the issue with the asymptomatic COVID-19 positive people. And unfortunately, they are there and they are delivering waste as ordinary households. So PPEs do the job, of course. Personal protection equipment. No particular requirement for composting in the draft paper by the European Union. And when it comes to treatment of residuals, they say it has to be incinerated in incineration or co-incineration facilities or safely disposed of in controlled landfills. Unfortunately, I think this draws too much attention to incineration. And so it may trigger interest by many decision makers in, well, let's build incinerators. But as I told you already, once the incinerator is there, the COVID-19 crisis is not there anymore. And we may have got a conflict between the existing incinerator and the long-term targets of the circular economy package. So it would be better to reward it, and we recommended it, into safely pre-treated and disposed of in controlled landfills. Anyway, in Europe, we have got a landfill directive which mandates pre-treatment, and it may be either thermal treatment, namely incineration, co-incineration, or biological treatment, biological stabilization. Also, it requires a temporary storage for reprocessing sites, 9 days, stipulated in the draft issued by the European Commission. But anyway, as we have said, there is no point in mandating such a long storage time. 3 days should be enough. And we highlighted it in our response. So, as I told you, the previous one was the first round of conclusion. And so there is a second and last one. The guidelines which have been prepared, drafted by the European Commission, are sufficiently solid and backed by science. Although the temporary storage times may be revised for reprocessing sites, for recycling sites, and management of residual waste may be fine-tuned in its wording, in its sentencing. Otherwise, it draws too much attention towards incineration. And also there is an alignment of the guidelines with the European roadmap for circular economy. So also the transitional adaptation to the current crisis may basically be aligned with a long-term vision. Anyway, the long-term vision is beyond any discussion. There is no plan whatsoever by the European Commission, by the European Union right now to revise not only the circular economy package, but also the new European Green Deal, which will even be more ambitious. And so get prepared for when the world will be better than now, more benign to us with a vaccine out there. So we will confine the COVID-19 crisis to history and we will be ready to have a colorful world once again. So in order to make you confident, let me leave you with a last picture. This is a hashtag Andrà tutto bene, which has been going on already quite a long time in Italy. It may be translated, everything will be fine. So of course we are making a huge effort to help our national health systems cope with the crisis, turning the tsunami into a surfable wave, smaller waves, flatten the peak and move it later on in time. But be safe, stay at home, because this is what makes each and everybody a hero. We know most of the heroes are out there in the real battlefields, which are retirement homes for the elderly, the hospitals, and also the public services, including waste collection. But everybody will be a hero staying at home and being safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Enzo. Wonderful. Yeah, fantastically interesting, informative, and positive, as always. So thank you very much for that. I wonder, we have a couple of questions specifically for you, Enzo, now, and then we'll open it up more to all three speakers. And a couple of questions, Enzo, it'd be great to get your perspective on whether you see the crisis at the moment likely to result in an increase in amounts of residual waste being sent for landfilling or incineration. You mentioned this transitional strategy. If you had guidance or advice for municipalities to avoid this, what could we really focus on at this stage?
Yeah, indeed, we have discussed also at the local level, because Italy, unfortunately, was one of the trailblazers in the COVID-19 crisis. But anyway, we can see already the short-term and mid-term trends in waste management. Of course, there were concerns by somebody that the incineration capacity or the landfilling capacity would not be enough to tackle those increasing amounts of waste, such as the COVID-19 positive waste, which has been worded by Italian central governmental authorities as mixed garbage. It cannot be separated anymore. This has been disputed by us. Of course, we sent notes based on scientific evidence, but that's it. We have to comply with the regulatory appropriations which are coming from the central government. And in the end of the story, I think that this is a time in which each and everybody is basically a citizen, even before being a waste addicted guy, a waste expert. And so right or wrong, this is my country. You understand what I mean? So they can make mistakes, but I understand that there's something more they have to think about right now. However, even considering that COVID-19 positive people and the quarantine people, so those ones who have been in contact with COVID-19 people, have been disconnected from separate collection, the amount of residual waste is not increasing because there is the effect of staying at home. So much of the household-like waste is hugely decreasing. First and foremost, restaurants, canteens, schools, whatever, and also many of the offices and activities because they have been locked down. So basically, there is, you know, there are effects countering each other, and so basically, there is no increase in the waste going there. In a long-term perspective, I do not advise anybody to consider investing in long-term infrastructure, which they would only consider to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, because the COVID-19 crisis is a matter of months. We will not have the new infrastructure within months, and it will be there when it's not needed anymore. So you may easily go bankrupt with that.
Indeed. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Enzo. Second question we had here about the recycling process at the moment, and whether, you know, from your experience, your expertise and sort of oversight from the European perspective, are recycling processes running as usual? And maybe from your own sort of perspective, being based in Lombardy, and, you know, what can municipalities do to help sort of try and avoid a decrease in rounds of collection and of recyclable waste as well?
That's an intriguing question. For the moment, I'm not a communication expert. In this respect, I'm more on the learning curve, and I try to absorb what the communication experts tell us. But anyway, one of the most intriguing messages which are getting across during the confinements is you have more time at home. So one of the first things you may do is to learn better to deal with your waste. So produce less waste in first instance, and then learn how to separate even better. This might be a positive message for people.
Absolutely. Perfect. Enzo, we had a question for you I'm going to propose, and then it'd be interesting to get Jane's perspective afterwards. We'll open up now to Jane and Paolo. And we had a question from Serene. I'm not sure if you can answer this, Enzo, but sorry to put you on the spot in advance. Whether there's scientific information available at the moment about the dosage, the amount of the virus that's needed for contamination and for spreading, and sort of what effect this has on the amount that it can be transmitted via surfaces, via different packaging at the moment. I'm not sure if Enzo or Jane, if you're happy to step in on this.
I'm keen to hear from Jane first, and we'll check my opinion on that.
So I'm not a virologist, and I'm also not a medical doctor. So I'm an environmental scientist, and I'm specialized in environmental toxicology. So it's not my area of expertise. But what I have heard from virologists is that the dose does matter. And so there's a difference between, you know, if someone who has the virus coughs into their hand, touches a doorknob, and then you touch the doorknob and then touch your face. There's a difference between that way of transmitting and, for example, if someone who has the virus coughs right in your face, and then you really get the whole full load of droplets in your face. It has a so the way that I would explain it is that, you know, your immune system responds then. So the more viruses get into your body, the more challenged your immune system will be. And I mean, that's basically, in a way, also how vaccination works, right? Of course, when you vaccinate, you're not injecting viable virus into people. You're injecting parts of the virus that are not viable, that stimulate your immune system to develop antibodies. And so I would imagine that if you just exposed to, like, you know, very, very, very little virus, then your immune system can more easily deal with it. But of course, then it depends again on what your immune system health situation is. And if your immune system is impaired, then probably a smaller dose of the virus may even lead to an outbreak of the disease. So it's complicated. That would be my answer. But I also was thinking, you know, about the survival answer of the virus on the surfaces, which, as we know, it's a very simplified, crude model for describing the real world situation. And then thinking about hospital waste, where people who have the virus, who have high titer loads in their phlegm, for example, in the mucus, when they blow their nose, and those tissues, then I don't know if it would be enough to say that, you know, after 24 hours, there's no more viable virus load in there. Yeah, I don't know about that. Are there any studies? Do you know if anyone's looked into that?
I don't specifically, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see if others on this call do, or Enzo, if you're.
No, basically all the guidelines, also the ones issued by the World Health Organization, include a particularly careful management of the waste which is coming from hospitals or quarantine sites as well. Because yeah, the load matters. are perfectly right in this respect. But let me go back on, well, we know there are two main channels of getting infected. One is inhaling, and you made properly a reference to coughing and sneezing and something like that. And the other one is touching surfaces and then touching your mouth, nose, or eyes with your hands. This is why what the current COVID-19 crisis is teaching us is wash your hands and then wash your hands once again. And once you're done, once again, okay? But if I may, I feel, yeah, this is really, really teaching me a change in my life, because I was not so mindful about washing my hands, but I can feel the dirt all around me right now, and until we have got the vaccine. But this pertains also, and probably mostly, to one-way materials which are getting into my home, because everybody may have touched them. And so when I make my purchase at the supermarket, then I take goods home and I put them on quarantine for 3 days. So is really plastics making us safer in this respect? I don't think so. You know, I don't think so. So, but this is just putting my icing on the cake.
Can I say something to that, Jack?
Sure. Yeah, please.
So yeah, I agree with you, Enzo. I think yeah, I mean the 3-day sequestering or quarantine, that's really playing it safe. Maybe 24 hours are enough already. I don't know, because as we saw in the data from the CDC and NIH, the titer or the viability of the virus rapidly declines over time, right? So that's what I've been picking up from virologists. After 24 hours, probably the loads are really low that you wouldn't get infected. But if you want to play it safe, do 3 days. You can also just wipe it down, as I said, and don't get fancy disinfectants. Just use warm water and soap, or ethanol if you have it. 70% should do the trick, and wipe it down. And as Enzo said, wash your hands, wipe the surfaces where you may have had contaminated material, and then you should be okay. Wipe the door handles. So I think, you know, we sort of, as humans, we sometimes have a tendency to kind of go full extreme. This virus is a bad one. Viruses generally are not good, but we also, when we disinfect, we're also killing microorganisms that are beneficial for our health. And we've been learning the last few years, we've been learning so much about the gut microbiota, for example, beneficial microorganisms that live on our skin that are part of health. And so just keep that in mind. If you overdo it with disinfecting, and it's especially if you're using chemicals to disinfect that are endocrine disruptors, you really may not be doing yourself a service, but a disservice. So try and keep sane, base it on scientific facts, and you know, mental health is also important.
Absolutely. Wonderfully put, Jane. Paolo, just to bring you in here and to get your thoughts about, any of the points that have been raised or the questions, and it'd be interesting to get your analysis about where you see at the moment, I mentioned it before, these recycling processes at the moment for recycling in Europe, and if there's any potential bottlenecks happening within the system that you're seeing across the continent, or challenges you imagine might be occurring in the next weeks or months. And also there was an interesting question about what advice can we give from a European context to outside of Europe, to maybe those countries from a low or medium income backgrounds who maybe are following on a similar trajectory to European countries, but are a couple of weeks behind.
Yeah, starting from the first question, there are already happening a lot of bottlenecks along the recycling and composting routes coming from the shortages that we have been seeing in the collection services. So in many cases that we are observing some shortages coming from recycling, but also to the supply chain side, because a lot of value chains use, as you know, secondary raw material. So if there are some issues at the beginning of the value chain. There are a lot of issues at the end. There are also some, since Enzo was speaking about composting, there are some interesting and very simple issues regarding when it comes to the interruption of services like collection of garden park waste. There are a lot of impacts, direct impacts on the composting side, because composting to the process of composting to need to have some materials coming from the park and garden waste. So very simple shortages in services at local level can impact across the value chains. Then the second question, it's very, very interesting, and I think that we should very much focus on the aspect concerning the informal sector, because they play a very important, big role in collecting and doing some part of they are part of the collection system, and they are working without any specific personal protective equipment and also training or other safety and health measures. They are actually some association that are and some NGOs that are addressing the issue. I can share with you, if you want, some of the guidelines provided by this NGO that provide some suggestion and some guidelines to how to deal with this issue of informal collection services. And then if I can make raise a point, because since we are speaking from the point of view of local authorities, I think I totally support the concept raised by Enzo and Jane about using evidence-based solutions, and also using our mind, and we have to be clever in this emergency period. And I think that a very important message is that should become very important in the communication from the local authorities is the prevention, because I think that since local authorities are the closer authorities to the citizens, they can impact with specific communication actions, asking citizens to work on prevention. And this is the top priority in the hierarchy of waste management, but also in the hierarchy of our lifestyle. So it's true that in this period we have also some issues regarding hygiene, and so some maybe measures that come from the waste prevention can be a bit more scary for someone, but I think that the clear message that should come from the local authorities should be addressed to waste prevention. And actually we have been observing a lot of interesting communication actions in this direction. For instance, I would like just to mention one from the Catalonia agency, that is one of our members, that they addressed in their information and communication action in this emergency period, prevention as a top priority. I think so. It's very, very, very interesting.
Thank you, Paolo. Yes, absolutely. And on a previous point, I think about the informal waste working sector, those who are interested in a number of questions, I would definitely point them to our sister organization, Gaia. The website is in the chat box here, who are doing fantastic work on raising awareness and promoting the rights of waste pickers in the informal waste sector here. Jane, I'm going to move on to you and sort of come round, final sort of round of questions. Jane, we had a question here about zero waste shops still operating and the precautions that are, when you say zero waste, a packaging-free shop, you know, a bulk shop. What can owners and consumers do to really take precautions when they enter these shops? And also, I don't know if you can combine the two here. We had a question about what restaurants can do to mitigate the risks when their customers use reusable containers for takeaways as well. And perhaps maybe not obviously topics for the moment in Europe when non-essential businesses are shut, but we're talking about this transition to a future society. And I'll come to you, Jane, first, and then maybe Enzo second on that.
So I think we all agree that reusable packaging is the best in terms of the environmental impact. But also, I think if you at least talking about what I call inert materials, materials that don't transfer any chemicals to the food, those are the best options. And so, and those materials are stainless steel and glass and ceramics maybe also, and those you can actually disinfect really easily. You know, I mean, you could just wash those. You could have, as a shop owner, if you're going low tech, just have a sink at the entrance of your shop and have someone, an intern, washing customers' containers there with soap water, or wiping them down with ethanol, or let people do it themselves even. You know, the virus is in people, and so it's really not the packaging that's going to make the solution to containing it. The solution is testing. We have to test people. We have to know who's carrying the virus. We have to know who's spreading the virus. And I think that's really how we need to stay sane. So until we can have that testing, and until we know who's spreading the virus, just disinfect the containers, ask people to bring clean containers, bring washed bags, for example. If you're using, I have, my favorite shopping bag is made of silk, actually, because I don't like the nylon bags, you know, the little ones that you can fold together because they smell after a while. So I really like the silk one, and you can just wash that, throw it in the washer 60 degrees with your laundry. It will kill the virus. You can wash cotton. So that's what you need to do. Disinfect hands. When we get masks, if people are carrying the virus or they don't know if they are, ask them to wear the mask. So I think that's what you need to do. In terms of takeaway, my favorite example is here in Zurich, where I live in Switzerland. There's a restaurant. They have tiffins, these Asian stainless steel containers, and you pay a deposit. It's 10 euros. It's quite a lot, but you can just return it. So they do home delivery with a bicycle. And so when I order a new order, then I just tell them how many tiffins I have to return, and they disinfect them. Stainless steel, perfect. Lives forever. You can disinfect it, doesn't leach hazardous chemicals. So that's how we need to go. We need to build that infrastructure now, and you know, convince people that this is the sane and smart thing to do.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jane. Yeah, that's a really comprehensive answer. And I think, yeah, from a zero waste Europe perspective, we hope that businesses and policymakers can really sort of use this opportunity to put in place more effective schemes and third-party operated reuse and systems that are certified, as you say, for health and safety reasons that follow this circular economic mechanism. So yeah, thank you. Just for the sake of time, I am going to pose final questions to you all, and it's going to be the same one Jane mentioned at the start, and Enzo and Paolo have continued this theme about positivity. And of course, right now the focus is a public health concern and protecting as many people as we can. But as Enzo mentioned, as we start moving on and transitioning away from this, as the virus spread begins to be controlled, what do you envisage the future holding? And we've had a number of questions about how can we make waste systems resilient and stronger to future crises that we will see, whether they're pandemics or other big challenges. Obviously climate change is the elephant in the room here. So I'll pose this to Enzo first, if that's okay. Apologies, this is a big question. And of course, a final sort of summary thoughts, and then if we go Enzo, then Paolo, if you want to follow, and then Jane, I'll let you have the last words here.
Well, first of all, I was planning to mention the same system that Jane mentioned when it comes to reusable containers for restaurants and something like that. I wanted to mention Zurich and Recycle. I think that's the perfect model in the longer run, because basically it's what we call product as a service, which perfectly targets the need both of circular economy and of ensuring sanitization, because sanitization is done in a controlled and centralized way, and it works. It works. It's not around the corner for many areas. Of course, it's more organizational than technological, because there's not much technology. but organization may take time, but I think that's the way to go. It is the way to go. More in general, when it comes to waste management in a mid-term and long-term perspective, yeah, I already said what had to be said. There is no backtracking from the European Union. Circular economy is related to much more than just COVID-19. It is about sustainability as a whole. It is about climate change. It is about occupational benefits. And it is about survival of the productive system in Europe, because we are importing 60% of primary raw materials from outside, and we can't afford it anymore. But also, if I may, making economy more circular and making recycling more local will set us free also to some extent. Well, globalization is there, accept it or not, it is there, and we have to live with that some way. But any contribution by recycling to pandemics, because the more local it is, the less prone to producing pandemics it may be. However, when it comes, there was a question I had picked in the chat box regarding the exports. How may the stop on exports affect circular economy? Well, this is a general problem, and it was happening long before the COVID-19 crisis due to the Chinese wall, the Chinese sword. But the European Union in the plastic strategy said that it doesn't want recycling to be oval. It wants it to be circular, and so within Europe. And therefore, in a long-term perspective, it should not be a problem anymore. However, that was basically pertaining to the low-grade, low-quality materials sent off to China and Asia, and not the high-quality PET, HDPE, which goes on the international market of commodities, because accept it or not, globalization is there.
Thanks, Enzo. Paolo, final remarks from yourself here?
Yeah, I think that, yeah, I support most of the things that Enzo just said. And I think that we should take stock of this experience to try to really figure out how to increase the resiliency of our system. And we should be clever to keep to pick the right parameters to analyze what elements of the different systems worked well or not well in this situation. And I think that a positive thing is that keeping again health in the very focus of the environmental protection could drive to maybe even more need of circularity and waste prevention. So I'm quite positive that this crisis could drive policies in the direction that, yeah, we should keep healthy and safety inside our policies. But I'm quite confident that the circularity and waste prevention will be the ways that will drive yeah, the new systems and our challenges ahead.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paolo. And over to you, Jane. Final remarks, if you can.
Well, we're running out of time, but I'll try and keep it short. You know, I think to me, food packaging really is just a symptom. And the challenges we have with food packaging are a symptom of a bigger problem. And to me, that bigger problem actually is what Enzo, or maybe you called it globalization. I don't know if that's what you meant, but the way that we produce, transport and consume foods across the globe, the way we produce food in itself is not sustainable, right? I mean, when we use intensive industrial agriculture, we're destroying soil fertility, we're exploiting freshwater resources, we're taking the water away from where it's needed. And we need packaging in order to enable those long distance transports. And so I think really for me, the big challenge here is to rethink how we can build our system to become more resilient and more robust. And that has to start with the the catchphrase from the 80s when I grew up, I think global act local. And that to me, that means detangling the complex global supply chains. I mean, one of the problems that we have with waste management is that waste management is is so different everywhere in the world, right? It's hyper local in a way. It differs from municipality to municipality. And yet globalized food producers, they produce one product that has to work for the global market. And that just, it's like trying to square the circle. You can't get that together. And so I think we need to get together. Yes, we need economists because we need a healthy economy, but we also need scientists to be at the table, and social scientists, natural scientists, waste management experts, toxicologists, and so on, to talk to each other and together, using knowledge, develop a stronger, better system. And it can't be that cost is the only factor that drives the systems. I really hope that that's something we've learned from the COVID crisis, that, you know, just putting every focus just on cost it's going to catapult us into the next crisis. So that's my 2 cents. I wanted to be hopeful, so let's keep hopeful. Scientists are being heard right now, and let's just hope that that's the way forward.
Indeed. Thanks so much, Jane. Absolutely right words to finish on. So yes, we'll end it there. Thank you so much to our speakers, Jane, Paolo, Enzo, for the hugely interesting, informative, and positive discussions here. Thank you all also for joining us today on Zoom, and for those watching on YouTube as well. This is one part of Zero Waste Europe's live webinar series. We actually have another one coming up on the 12th of May, which is specifically looking at food contact materials, so relevant to some of the discussions here today. I'd also recommend the presentations that the speakers made today will be on the Zero Waste Europe Academy website in the coming days as well. So do please check that out. And also on that website, you can sign up to the city's newsletter to be kept up to date with the latest information from our work. So yes, thank you all again for this opportunity to join today. As has been mentioned, these are difficult and challenging times, of course, but there's a lot of hope and solidarity and positivity coming through our society. So yes, we can all be heroes here by staying at home and keeping our distance. So thank you all for joining. Have a great day, and hope to speak to you soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.